Hello everybody. In this video, I would like to show you the recent game between former world champion Magnus Carlsen and the current world champion Gukesh. The game was played at the relatively recently finished Grand Chess Tour tournament in Zagreb, and as if you follow chess, you probably know that these games between Carlsen and Gukesh were very much hyped. And the game I would like to show you actually happened in the Blitz part of the event, and I followed the game live, and I was really impressed and even amazed how easily Carlsen managed to beat the current world champion. Now, to add a bit more spice to the whole story behind the game, is that after the game, Carlsen called the game rubbish and called the way he played old man's chess. Now, we may beg to differ when it comes to old men and who is an old man in chess and who is not. But I think his characteristic of old man's chess is quite to the point, in fact. And for those who are not well familiar with the term, it means that playing chess basically without calculation. And while watching the game, I was this was the main aspect that impressed me, is that he actually managed to play a game without calculating it, without allowing Gukesh to show any of his tactical and calculational skills. Perhaps I said I was impressed by more aspects, but what made it really impressive from the very start was that how Carlsen so easily managed to obtain that type of position where he effectively squashed any attempts by Gukesh to even remotely complicate the game. So let's start with the game, and I'll show you. I'll explain what my impression was about the game. And this time I won't be using basically an engine. I would just be explaining what I saw during the game, what I was thinking during the game, and obviously being a human, I did not calculate much. But as you can see in this game, that wasn't even necessary. So the game starts with e4, e5. Carlsen was playing with the white pieces, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez, and now Gukesh plays the move knight f6. In retrospect, maybe this was not the best choice. In the same event, for example, against Šarić, probably playing for a win with the black pieces, Gukesh went for the move a6, and he went for the Marshall gambit. He obtained some chances, but the game was eventually drawn. But here against Carlsen, he plays knight f6, going for the, or trying to go for the Berlin endgame. Carlsen doesn't want to go for the endgame. He goes d3, defending the pawn on e4, and bishop c5. Knight c3 by Carlsen, castles by Gukesh, and now bishop takes c6. The first curious moment, because here already instead of knight c3, white could have taken with bishop takes c6, dc6, and knight c3, but this would have allowed black to have more flexibility with the plans, because the king could have also gone to the queen side. So after knight c3, he waited for black to go short castle. It wasn't forced, not at all. But once short castle has been played, now he goes for this relatively static pawn structure, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, that is very common in this line in the anti-Berlin with d3. And now Carlsen plays the move bishop e3. So already here we can see the depth of Carlsen's, let's call it old man's chess strategy. He goes for a position where the structure is fixed, pretty static, and there is basically no tactics and no scope for a dynamic calculational player like Gukesh to excel. So bishop e3, now it's a choice for black. The bishop is attacked on c5. Black can either choose to take on e3. After bishop e3, f takes e3, we get this structure with the double pawns in the center on e3 and e4, but white gets the open f file. Or as Gukesh did, drop the bishop back to d6, defending the pawn on e5. Both options are perfectly fine. It's a matter of choice. And now after bishop d6, Carlsen moves the bishop again, bishop g5. Now again, this is a very I would say instructive point. The first one I think was actually choosing to go for these types of positions, illustrating Carlsen's general strategy for the game. And here after bishop g5, a move that Carlsen has played before a long time ago against Grischuk in an online game, he's actually provoking black to weaken the king side. So the pin on the knight on f6 is a bit unpleasant. So Gukesh goes h6. In that game, Grishchuk went for the move queen e7, intending to go later to go queen e6 and get rid of the pin without touching the pawns on the king side. Both options are perfectly fine, of course. So h6, attacking the bishop, bishop h4, keeping the pin, yeah, and now bishop g4. I think this is already, again, nothing wrong with how Gukesh is playing, but and the position will remain equal for a very long time. But again, it's about the strategy and the character of the position. And it's clear from how the game developed that the character of the position was much more to Carlsen's liking than to Gukesh's. So this, I mean, way of playing, of first choosing the Berlin and then going for exchanges, while objectively it was perfectly fine, obviously, in practical sense, it was a pretty bad, I would say, choice against Carlsen, and we will see how this pans out. It's worth pointing out that after g5, white can't really take on g5 because then there are no pieces to support the attack. Let's say something like this. Yeah, I mean, just king g7, for example, and there are no pieces to support the attack against the king side. So bishop drops back to g3, but this would have played into Carlsen's hands because now the f5 square is weakened, and let's say queen e7 because now the pawn on e5 is hanging. So queen e7 and knight d2. Yeah, knight f1, knight e3, and there's a nice spot on f5, maybe queen h3, queen f3 to avoid some bishop g4 trapping of the queen. Yeah, then land on f5, maybe long castle at the later stage, h4, and so on. It's pleasant for white. Yeah. So Gukesh goes for bishop g4, h3, take on f3, queen f3, and now bishop e7, breaking the pin. So this was Gukesh's idea. Without a knight on f3, there is no attack on the pawn on e5, so the bishop can drop back to e7 to break the pin. And now there is another instructive moment in the game. The pin is broken and the bishop on h4 has nothing to do, and I was, again, pretty impressed by what Carlsen did, voluntarily taking on f6. So this was just great because you see more pieces are exchanged, and what's left on the board after bishop f3 is a battle of a knight versus bishop. And the position being static, relatively closed, means that the knight is the superior light piece. Mind you, objectively, position is still equal, but practically much easier to play with white. So for me, this was perhaps the most impressive thing in the whole game. Actually, navigating the game towards this character of the middle game position, and this really takes a mastery to be able to do so. Obviously, yeah, he was helped by Gukesh's opening choice, but still, just going in the direction that he planned before the game is just worked great, and the way he actually implemented all these exchanges, like consistently following the pre-game plan, how to steer the game towards this type of position, just incredible. Now Carlsen goes for the move g3. I was expecting something more aggressive, maybe g4 or something like that, but this, I understood when he played it, is that it's a typical ploy from some Sicilians, for example, especially the Sveshnikov, where there is a bishop on f6 when white goes g3, h4, limiting the mobility of this bishop by controlling this g5 square. And by placing the pawns on dark squares, even though they are pretty far, and this pawn on e5, all these still limiting the mobility and activity of the dark squared bishop. So queen d7, natural move by Gukesh, just connecting the rooks, h4. So here we go, slowly limiting, yeah, and taking some space on the king side. So bishop e7. And now I was surprised by Carlsen's move. I was expecting something more aggressive, like long castle. Yeah, and then trying to attack g4, g5 or something like this, yeah. But he actually went short castle. And again, this for me, it was a very, again, instructive moment because he literally does not allow even a whisker of possible counterplay for his opponent. So after long castle, that's a perfectly fine move. But black will start pushing pawns, maybe bishop b4 at some point, targeting this knight. The knight will move away, maybe queen e6, so on, and he will get some counterplay. Yeah, white may also increase his chances of a successful attack because the rooks can join the G files, G and H file, and so on. but this would have made the game sharper. So Carlsen just eliminates everything, any possibility, and goes short castle. And I was again a very impressive, decision as I was observing the game. So bishop c5 by Gukesh, activating the bishop. King g2, getting away from the diagonal. Bishop d4. And now, instructive moment, which is in line with the plan that White had for the game, avoiding the exchange of the light pieces by playing knight e2. Yeah. And here I think maybe it was a chance for Gukesh to stir up the game a little bit, to avoid the staleness, if you will, of the position where White has all the comfort and possibility to maneuver behind the very solid pawn structure. And I think maybe he should have taken on b2. And I was looking at lines like rook b1, bishop drops back, take on d4, or because now taking on b7, there is bishop b6 and the rook is kind of trapped. So now knight d4, queen d4, rook b7. And I understand that, okay, now these pawns on the c file are more exposed, but the game becomes more open and more tactical, more calculational. I think this would have suited Gukesh more. And I think he would have drawn this had he gone for this type of position. But he went bishop b6. And again, this small imprecision from the aspect of the character of the position this move chooses plays into Carlsen's hands. So bishop b6. Yeah, the bishop remains on the active diagonal, but active only superficially active because it's empty, nothing to do there. g4 by Carlsen. So I said, aha. So now I realized, okay, so he wants to attack, but with the king on the king side, so to avoid any possible pawn storms on the other hand in case of a long castle, for example. Yeah, g4, knight g3, knight f5 may come. Yeah, so g6 covering the f5 square, knight g3 still, queen e7 attacking the pawn on h4, rook h1. I was thinking maybe he would have gone h5, but then he went h5 later on, so this would have been similar to what happened later in the game. So goes rook h1. I think it's also a typical moment where he keeps his options open. So h5 would have determined immediately the position on the king side. There is already some tension, but no, he's just defending the pawn and keeps the option open for later. Very patient play. Rook a d8, intending rook d6. This in fact reminded me of the same move and the same idea of rook d8, rook d6 that Gukesh played in the second game in the World Championship match against Ding Liren in Singapore. There we had the Italian game. Yeah, so he played the game rook d8, rook d6. So this reminded me of that game. And now I was surprised by Carlsen's next move, but then in retrospect, it's kind of a typical, yeah, of how game is played on higher levels. I was expecting h5, which is normal, yeah, especially with the rook on h1, threatening take on g6, and the pawn on h6 is hanging, but again rook d6. And now if rook takes, the problem is that the bishop gets to have some life, yeah, and there is a problem with the f2 pawn. So no immediate gains from h5, and Carlsen plays a4, a move on the other side of the board. Yeah. Very instructive because I think already he kind of foresaw that he would need to do something on the queen side as well. Yeah, so a4 is a kind of very unpleasant move because a5 is a threat to gain some space on the queen side, and black is kind of not too comfortable with any decision. Yeah, so if a6 avoids putting a pawn on a dark square the same as the bishop, but then a5 gains some space, attacking the bishop. Let's say bishop a7, and then at a later stage maybe rook a3, rook b3 will be unpleasant. Not ideal. Always some small niggling problems for black that make his position more difficult to play. Gukesh went a5, but this is a problem again because these two pieces, the bishop and the pawn, are susceptible to a knight attacks. Imagine knight coming to c4, attacking both the bishop and the pawn, and this will actually happen later in the game. So very far-fetched by Carlsen. So a5, and now again I was expecting h5, but then rook d6, but he went to queen e2, and I wasn't quite sure what he wanted. then I thought, okay, maybe he's getting away from this attack on the f file that we saw in the hg6 fg6 line. I said, okay, he can play any move. I mean, he's in a super solid position. Yeah, rook d6 and now queen d2. And now I said, so that's what he wanted. Yeah, attacking the pawn on h6 and keeping an eye on that one on a5. So the bishop is now glued to the b6 square. King g7 defending the pawn. Yeah, and now h5. And now the threat is maybe to take, and then the pawn on h6 would be under attack. g5 obviously is not an option because knight f5 wins the queen. And queen g5 is more or less the only option, sensible option for black. But this, I thought, okay, this already looks very promising for white, because take the queen, hg, yeah, and now these pawns here, potential weaknesses, and even making the structure even more static. So I wasn't sure. Yeah, I was thinking maybe Carlsen can take on g6, but then fg, and then the pawns are ugly, but the bishop springs to life. So he didn't do that. He went knight f1, and then I thought, aha. So he's rerouting the knight to c4, and he turning the attention towards the queen side. I was like, wow, this is pretty good. Yeah, I mean, starting on the king side and flicking in this a4 move on the queen side, and again going back to the king side, exchanging queens, now switching back to the queen side. Very, very fluid, very, very flexible, and very, very impressive. So now Gukesh went rook f6, attacking the pawn on f2, but this is easily dealt with the move f3, and kind of a pretty impressive pawn structure that white has. All the pawns, except the pawn on b2 on the light squares. So Gukesh went rook f4, and at first I was confused, what's the rook doing there? Yeah, but then I realized actually the idea is to go f5 and trying to open the f file. So Carlsen went hg6, eliminating the threat of f5. F takes g6, and now black managed to open the f file and attacks the pawn on f3. But this is easily dealt with the move rook h3, just defending the pawn on f3, and because that's the only way to defend, because like knight d2, bishop e3 would be awkward. Yeah, the knight is attacked and the pawn is attacked, so not great. So rook h3 defending the pawn on f3. And now Gukesh went rook h8. I wasn't sure about this decision during the game, but as in a way exchanges an attacking rook on f8, which is attacking the pawn on f3, for a defensive one on h3. But maybe Gukesh was worried something like knight d2, rook h1, and maybe white can penetrate along the h file. Well, maybe. Yeah. But after rook h8, take on h8, king h8, knight d2, the knight is getting to this ideal square on c4. And as it turns out, it's already black is forced to rush with this rook from f4 back to e6 to defend the pawn on e5. And after rook f6, knight c4, attacking the pawn on e5, rook e6, black is completely paralyzed. Yeah, and now was kind of move 32, and black can barely move. The knight is paralyzing all black's pieces. The rook must stay on the e file to defend the pawn on e5. The bishop must stay on b6 to defend the pawn on a5. Yeah. So ideal knight, and a clear demonstration of the superiority of a knight over a bishop in these types of positions. So Carlsen went rook b1, threatening b4. Yeah, the idea is to go b4 and then attacking the pawn on a5, and if after a4, rook b4, the bishop on b6 and the pawn on b7 behind it would be lost. So it's kind of it's clear that black is lost. And being a blitz game, things happen fast. I couldn't understand, like, black didn't make any obvious mistakes, and yet in mere 30 moves he was just completely busted, lost, and not just lost but simply strangulated without any counterplay whatsoever. So this was really impressive, and well, old man's chess. Yeah, I wish I could play like this, even though I wouldn't call it old man's chess, but yeah, just not allowing any type of counterplay, not even calculating, playing, just maneuvering here and there, and all of a sudden white is winning. So c5. Already I knew that once bearing this bishop on b6 with a move like c5, stopping b4, but uh, again, can't be good. Yeah, the bishop is just buried. So rook h1 check, king g7, and now king f2. So I thought, okay, king wants to go to e2, and then I wasn't really sure how white can break through. But then I remember this maneuver, rook a1, rook a3, rook b3, and then rook b5. And then the pawn on a5 will fall. Yeah. So it's just patient maneuvering by Carlsen, getting king centralized, and then going for rook a1. And in this position, Gukesh tried to kind of not die lying down and not moving at all, taking advantage of the fact that the bishop on b6 and the king on f2 on the same diagonal. So he goes bishop a7, giving up a pawn on a5 by intending when the knight moves to go c4 and open the diagonal for the bishop. But this won't give any counterplay or compensation whatsoever. So knight a4, 5, c4 check, king e2, cd3, king d3. Yeah, and it's basically game over. White is a pawn up, the weakness on b7 remains, the weakness on e5 remains, and the bishop again is looking down an empty diagonal. Well, no work whatsoever. The game happens around it. Rook d6 check now by Gukesh. King c4, rook a6, stacking the knight and the pawn on a4. Knight takes b7, check on a4, b4. It's just game over. Yeah, white has an extra king on the queen side, extra pawn, and black's problem is that even his own king cannot approach the queen side because then rook h7 will happen. Rook a6, rook d1, threatening rook d7, rook c6 check, king b3, bishop d4. And in this position, the last, I would say, instructive moment in the game, I was expecting the move c4, just advancing, but then realizing that this bishop now, well, suddenly not maybe such a bad piece because it just blocks the d file and maybe black can fight. But Carlsen's move is much better. Rook d3, intending c3, and getting rid of this bishop, kicking it away from this seemingly good position on d4. So king f6, c3, getting rid of the bishop, bishop f2, rook d7, and now the pawn on c7 will fall after something like knight d8 or knight f5, attacking the rook on d6 and then taking the pawn. Gukesh went rook b6, rook c7, and here he resigned 2 pawns down, still without any counterplay. So pretty impressive, I would say. At least this was super impressive for me following the game, especially bearing in mind this was a blitz game, and how Carlsen just automatically won without any counterplay, because usually in blitz control is lost at some point. Some wild tactics happen, some counterplay, some sacrifice, but here no, total control, total domination, and absolutely giving no chances to the world champion. Extremely impressive, and just I think it's just, well, if only we could play like this. Yeah. So this was my explanation, no engines involved, of the game Carlsen Gukesh. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a very enjoyable, very instructive game for me when I was following it, and hopefully my explanations helped you understand old man's chess a little bit better. So I will close it up with this one. Make sure you check my Chessable courses, and if you like reading, consider subscribing to my Substack. You can see the link above. And if you really like my work, you can also consider becoming a paid subscriber to my Substack newsletter. And in case you haven't done so already, make sure you smash that subscribe button, and I would really appreciate that, as I know that more people enjoy my videos. So thanks for watching again, and I'll see you soon. Take care.